back with our panel on the future of the corporation in the global economy. I'm Robert Smith from NPR's Planet Money and from Columbia University. And so far, we've been talking about the challenges to the corporation in the United States and Europe and to Indian firms that serve that market. But let's go bigger. Let's go maybe even more chaotic in the next part of our panel to Brazil and to China. I have two guests joining us who I'm excited to talk to. The first is Patricia Moraes. She's the founder and managing partner of Unbox Capital. She's invested in technology and growth equity companies. Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with the Columbia community.
So Patricia's in Brazil, and let's go to evening in China, where Fred Hu joins us. Fred is the founder and chairman of Primavera Capital. Before that, he was a partner at Goldman Sachs and the chief economist there. Hello, Fred.
Hi, Robert.
So let's start in China. While the rest of the world is coming out of COVID and dealing with a lot of issues surrounding that, not easy issues either. We see China's zero COVID policy being tested quite a bit. You're in Hong Kong that just had a lot of COVID cases. Shanghai is in partial lockdown. As we look forward, how much do we need to worry about China's role in the global economy with the rise of COVID there?
Well, this is a $1 trillion question, given China's place in the global economy as the world's largest manufacturing economy and the largest exporter. Sometimes, as we say, the cure might do a bit more harm than disease itself. Yes, there's been outbreak, surge in Omicron across China, something the country has never seen, since the beginning of the pandemic. Mostly it's been 0 cases or just a handful of cases, but now daily cases shot up to tens of thousands, just granted, compared to many parts of the world, right? That's maybe nothing really unusual. What really distinguishes China from the rest of the world is this very draconian zero COVID policy. So that, as you could imagine, it's been extremely disruptive for businesses and for the average citizens in their daily lives, right? Frequent lockdown restrictions just really have taken a toll on the economy. And, just really a week ago, Shenzhen, which I would argue is probably the most consequential player in the global IT manufacturing and supply chain.
In the entire world, yeah.
Yes. 1 week shutdown, the ripple effect, that's the shock waves just felt throughout the world. Service sector, retail, dining, hotel, transportation services, as you could imagine. So that's been a prime, zero COVID has been a primary drag of China's economy. And therefore, really is also a significant risk factor for the world economic outlook in 2022.
Let's turn to Patricia now in Brazil. You're not facing the issues with coronavirus as much right now. You've come out of it like the United States has to some extent. But you're facing, as a country, Brazil, who supplies the world, especially in commodities, you're facing this uncertainty now about where your products are going, what your future ties will be.
Yes, Robert, what we have seen through this, let's call disruption of the whole supply chain during COVID, right, was that there are certain things that countries can try to develop themselves internally, right? So we've seen the move of some industries or certain aspects of the economy to develop more locally in the emergency, right? That you needed to, we call, let's say, masks and things like that. Brazil was very fast to adapt ventilators and things like that. Brazil was able to adapt. However, there are certain things, such as some of the commodities that Brazil produces, that it's just impossible to quickly develop elsewhere. So it has shown, I think, Brazil and the world even more the importance of being a global supplier of food, of pulp, iron ore, and key commodities. And I think that I always say that when the compliance of the buyers or other producers is high, it obliges you to comply with higher standards, even if some of the regulations are still behind the curve. So I think that Brazil has always been, for example, in agriculture, at the forefront of technology. And it's even more now because of the visibility that it has gotten, focusing on sustainable ways of producing and actually marketing in a better way to show how how those practices and sustainable practices, in a way, putting the light on the importance of Brazil in certain exports has actually obliged Brazil to evolve on the way it communicates how it's producing, evolve practices around some practices. So I think it's been a very good evolution for us.
Well, it's strange if you were trying to run a business these days and you're trying to figure out your supply chains and where you're getting your products and where your labor is. We can talk about the labor issue too, because the alliances sort of seem to be changing. If I'm a company that relies on agricultural imports from Brazil, I now unfortunately are going to have a lot of competitors in Europe and especially in Africa too, who counted on Ukraine and Russia for certain exports. You can sort of see the supply chains, shifting in real time. And to you, Fred, Hugh, in China, the history of the past 10 years, in fact, your company, your success has been all about moving the United States and China closer together and cooperation in companies and in finance and in making those ties closer. And now we're in a situation where we worry about that. We worry that is going to happen over the next 10 years. Are we at a fundamental shifting point now, Fred, or am I just caught up in the moment a little bit?
Robert, I think we are really at the inflection point. For the last 30, 40 years, certainly since the end of the Cold War, the world has been converging, together. Free market economy, trade, flow of capital, labor, human capital. So that has really produced tremendous benefits for the world economy. Just the world become much more productive, much more efficient because of division of labor. Compared with the advantage, for example, Brazil, clearly has a huge competitive advantages. In agriculture, in range of commodities and some manufacturing goods as well. And in fact, China, Brazil trade has boomed as trade between US and China and the rest of the world. So the world become more convergent and more dependent on each other, and there's a more elaborate division of labor. So resources have been mobilized, just more efficiently allocated. So like we have seen, this tremendous boom of the world economy and the tremendous creation of wealth, right? You mentioned earlier about the inflation. For many, many years, I lived in the US for many years, right? Inflation since the early 1980s, but all just disappeared. Okay, US had endured long, unprecedented periods of faster growth, employment growth, but very, very little inflation. Okay, so that really is from globalization, right? Just more countries produce and so keep the prices, consumer prices low. You go to Walmart, go to Costco, and Whole Foods, just everything you can see from China, from Brazil, from all over the world, right? So consumers have many more choices at the more affordable prices. So let's just say the benefits are just massive. At the same time, globalization clearly has also caused a dislocation in certain community, certain segment of society, inequality and all that. So there's a lot of discontent and anger. So how to respond to that without, stop globalization, without, reversing completely. That's the ongoing challenge. But for Patricia and myself, as investors, right, we all strive in a more connected, interconnected world because we see more opportunities. And, so, as investor, we, probably have higher prospect of return on capital. But at this moment, I do worry that there's so much backlash, and on top of it, pandemic and the war. So this is all just a toxic mix that really threaten, the golden era of globalization. That may, really stop, slow, or maybe at its worst, just a reversal.
You are both investors in companies. You deal with risk for a living, and you deal with interest rate risk, with market risk, with labor risk. There's all of these risks out there. Now, after the sanctions in Russia, I think a lot of people are surprised with how quickly investments in a country, which they always knew had certain risks to it, but that, investments in a country can become worthless because the world changes overnight. Political decisions made outside of corporations can all of a sudden upend things. So I'm wondering for both of you, is this a new thing that you have to think about? That as you invest in a company, you look at the economic fundamentals, but you also have to say, what happens if the leader of this country or that country does something out of my control and the rest of the world responds to me and my investment? Patricia, I don't want to talk Brazilian politics, but there are risks. There are definitely risks.
Robert, I think, I have a saying that is, if you make it in Brazil, you make it anywhere. Mimicking Frank Sinatra's New York, New York.
Yeah.
Just because, we've lived with volatility for many years, at least people on my age bracket. So it's little capital and a lot of creativity to get around volatility, be it in the FX, be it in politics or regulation. I think that we need to adapt fast. This is the new world, right? We've been doing this for 30 years and we'll continue to do this for 30 years. And it's, even though we can put barriers and we can, raise walls, the reality is the world is more connected than ever. I mean, I remember when I was at Columbia Business School, I didn't have a cell phone. I mean, I cannot even think how I did that. I had an answering machine and I had to call home from a payphone. So, to see if I got any job offers, right? Now, what I'm seeing is a little bit the other way around. I talked a little bit when we were speaking earlier about the globalization of labor in tech. That's not gonna reverse. I see even small companies. I invest in growth capital. Those companies are starting to scale, and they have employees everywhere. Because people are working remote, especially in the tech world. So, I think that if you want to control outside risk, you're going to go crazy, not going to do anything. So
Yeah.
what I've I've learned is, let's do the best that we can inside the companies. Let's make them flexible. Let's have good partners that can adapt to changing situations very fast. And let's take advantage to leapfrog some of the things, reaching out outside. Just to give you a sense, three of our investments, they're not very large. I mean, those are companies that are maybe doing 30, 40 million in revenues. They have operations outside Brazil. They have done acquisitions outside in the US, mainly. They have done acquisitions outside. So, I think, and that also, frankly, counts as a hedge, right? As the real was depreciating, our US business was booming. As, now the US may face inflation, interest rates rising, the Brazil business, the real is appreciating. So in the end, let's look inside, let's be agile, let's be nimble inside the company, and we'll do the best. And just to close, I was at JP Morgan for 22 years as head of investment banking, and I've helped a lot of the Brazilian companies going outside of Brazil, the large companies. We're talking, the steel companies, mining companies, consumer product companies. And, it was unanimous across all the sectors that going outside decrease the volatility. You end up learning the best practices and have a very healthy exchange. Your management becomes more global and with a broader vision and frankly, better at what they do, right? So I think we can have the walls, and of course we need to comply, and especially in the war situation. I mean, I think all those decisions were very well thought out, but it's going to be tough to keep people inside. Well, we saw in COVID how tough it is to keep people inside, right? The world is global. People are global, and companies are made of people.
Wow. It's morning in Brazil. So Patricia has an optimistic morning view. It's nighttime in China, not to be metaphorical about it. But Fred, do you agree, or do you see new political risks, as you look at where you're going to invest your money?
Well, absolutely. We have seen rise in, domestic, political uncertainty and international political uncertainty, geopolitical confrontation and tensions just everywhere. Long time ago, as Patricia alluded, when we think about the political or / regulatory uncertainty, we're all thinking that emerging markets, represented by China or Brazil, were really volatile, and industrialized, developed democracies are a bastion of stability. I think it's no longer true. I think if you're someone from Mars, say, watch what's happening in the US between 2016 and 2020, and what's happening right there now, you wouldn't think that's the same country, namely United States, right? And, Brexit and others, these are, the mature industrial democracies could also be a source of shock waves and instability. And of course, now, with the Ukrainian war going on, and tensions between US and China, and even between US and some of its allies, for quite some time. So the world just really become a very unsettled place, this kind of geopolitical uncertainty. That really is something new, for business, for investors to navigate. But I think, I agree with the, Patricia. So, this is just a new paradigm, and I'm afraid it's going to probably be here for quite a while longer. And for business, really just need to be adaptable, need to be nimble, and need to be resilient. And I would say, if you have a chance, if you have opportunity to be diversified, right? So like so that again, you need like geographical diversification and other, diversification. So that all, I think, Patricia, I'm sure what you learned at Columbia Business School and all your, lifelong professional experience, may work to your benefit.
Fred, I was watching a video that you made 10 years ago, where someone was interviewing you and asking you about what was going to happen in a decade and the challenges of the next decade, so I could fact check you. You talked about the challenges of domestic consumption in China and the rising middle class there. Check, absolutely. You talked about the challenges of market regulation and technology regulation that countries would have to struggle with, which was exactly right. We're in the middle of that, right? And then you talked about climate change. And it made me a little bit sad, because I was like, wow, of all the changes, I mean, China has changed in so many ways, and the economy has changed for all of us in so many ways. And yet, on the climate change issue, it feels like not only is progress slow, but the more problems there are in the world with war and inflation and supply chains, the further back climate change is pushed in the agenda. It seemed there are moments when the world and companies can talk about this, mostly during good times, but when the challenges come, it seems to get pushed to the back. Are you worried about this and about the progress we've made and about whether we're going to get a setback on dealing with climate change because of all of the chaos right now?
Robert, we often hear about politicians declaring or this and that, as existential, threat. I really view climate change is uniquely, qualified to be an existential threat to all of us, to all nations, to our planet Earth. In the short term, I worry, that given the Ukraine war, right, the sanctions and the spike in energy prices, and the inflation, so people scramble, nations, scramble to find the energy supply. So now, whether it's fossil energy, probably lower gear, right, energy security supply trumps everything. So I worry about that. But I think in the mid to long term, I'm still hopeful. Compared to 10 years ago, I do think there's a much stronger global consensus. Governments, businesses, and the individual citizens all come around to see, climate change, as a vast challenge to our world. So the answer is really the energy transition, right? So we need to really shift from carbon-heavy traditional fossil energy to renewable, clean energy, solar, wind, biomass, hydrogen, even nuclear, right? If we can have very safe, next-gen nuclear technology. So I think there are a lot of answers, but the transition is not going to be a straight line. It's going to be difficult, and there'll be a transitional cost. So I think, I hope, again, when I talk about geopolitics and how divisive the world has become, but this is climate change is clearly, they don't distinguish your democracy or authoritarian government. You're in Asia or in the Americas, right? We're all exposed to the consequences of climate change. And so sometimes, I think, there's a big forest, is in fire, right? So we are like different animals. Let's not fight each other. Let's put out the fire in the forest so we can all survive. That's hopefully, this something will transcend short-term national politics, international politics, and that the world, can be unified. So we can make sustained progress It's not going to be overnight, but as long as we stay course, I'm still optimistic that humanity will be able to prevail in meeting the challenges of climate change.
Patricia, from your point of view in Brazil, and we've already established that you're an optimistic person on this, but what do you see in terms of changes in countries like Brazil and the view from there about being able to focus on long-term problems when the short-term problems are so pressing?
Robert, the way as I said before, I mean, the world is talking about global climate change in a way that we haven't seen before, even though there's a lot of other noise around, right? And in my view, the next wave, I mean, we had in the last, let's call it 15 years, a huge impact of innovation in technology, right? Across all industries, across companies, right? So we had a wave of innovation through technology. I think that we have already seen the start of the wave of innovation in sustainability, which for me is the next wave. Wall Street is always ahead, right, to the financial markets. So what we've seen is a lot of impact funds, for example, all the asset managers talking about what type of investments they are comfortable, what compliance they want on their investments. Of course, we cannot just, adapt all companies to it, but just having the discussion and having, in a way, you change the priority. So when you're going to do an investment, instead of first looking for the return, maybe you should be looking for the way the business is being conducted first, as how it impacts the environment, and then look at the return. And I think that this is slowly starting to happen. And if we start to see, and I think we have already started to see a lot of innovation in sustainability, it will become cheaper, easier to adapt businesses to be more sustainable. Of course, we're not talking about all the businesses here, but if we can at least have a segment of the economy, which could be a large one. We talk about packaging, right, which is a big issue. We talk about clothing. It's not only the traditional ones that get beaten up, like fossil fuels, etc., energy, but you have other or agriculture. How can you do a more sustainable, produce more with less? We dream of the net zero or even the positive farm, depending on how you work the land and how much chemical do you really need to use. So I think that innovation in sustainability is going to be a big driver of this change, and also a big driver of great companies to be created.
We have time for just a quick question for each of you. So you're both investors, and as investors, you're clearly optimistic, because that's sort of the definition, right? You believe that the future will be better than the present. That's what investing is. But imagine if behind closed doors, one of your CEOs of one of your companies comes to you and says, there are so many unpredictable things. What is just one thing? What is the one thing I need to do to prepare for an unknown and uncertain and maybe rocky, chaotic future over the next few years? We'll start with Patricia. What's one quick thing a company can do?
Team. You have to have a team that is excellent, that works together well, that is agile to change to circumstances. And I mean, frankly, that love what they're doing, not love in the sense, oh, I love my job, but they really believe in what they're doing. We talk about, purpose and all that, which is great. It's a simplification, right? But one thing is for you to be so focused in the dream to change the world, to impact the environment, or to improve society, that you will adapt and you will foresee what's coming. We cannot control what's outside. We can only control what's inside. So if you have a team that is aligned, focused, which is actually, frankly, one of the biggest challenges that have been posed by COVID, since people are working from everywhere and a lot of them remotely, right? How do you create a culture around the business? How do you communicate well and bring everybody together to solve issues, to adapt to new situations? So I think probably, so have the right team, communicate well, and I think you need to be agile for the changing world.
Great advice. Fred Hugh, we'll end with you. What's one piece of advice you'd give to a CEO at this moment?
Well, first of all, I agree, with what Patricia has prescribed. Maybe I just put it in a different way. I would say it's just also adaptability, given, the world is just so uncertain, changes so fast, so many unpredictable. So, in the end, it's not necessarily the strongest or the fastest, right? It would be who can adapt, the most adaptable that would win. So I think the leadership, the team need to be really adaptable, responsive to unknown changes, and then the organization as a whole need to be very resilient. So that's how we can cope with all what's going on, some of the really crazy, negative stuff, scary stuff. But in the end, we could all succeed. Create more jobs, create more values, and make the world again, forward against all odds.
Well, thank you both for being adaptable to all of the challenges that I've thrown at you. I think this panel has revealed all of my worries about the current moment and the future of the world. And both Patricia and Fred and our previous panelists have made me feel a little bit better. Like you're thinking about these things, and you're continuing to do your job and have hope in the future, which is what we all want to have. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. Bye-bye.